Hi there. Thank you very much for coming to our first open session for under the Asian Dramaturgs Network. We're going to be hearing from 4 female artists on dramaturgies of female performance.
ちょっと時間が押していて申し訳ありません。これから、まず 1回目のオープンセッション、アジアンドラマトゥルグ、ネットワークの、一番最初のセッションを始めたいと思います。で、今こちらにいる4人の、女性の、人たちにこれからパネリストたちにこれから発表してもらいます。
I'd just like to make a very quick announcement and apology that unfortunately this session will be conducted in English. All 4 panelists will present in English.
で、最初に一つお断りしたいんですけれども、申し訳ないんですけれども、本日のプレゼンテーションはすべて、英語で行われます。
However, during the Q&A session, we may have time for Japanese interpretation. So please feel free to ask questions in Japanese so that our interpreter, Tomoko-san, could help.
ですけれども、Q&A の時間も少し取っておりますので、その際には、日英の通訳がつきます。なので、日本語で質問してくださっても通訳できるようになっておりますので、ぜひ質問してみてください。
Right. In the interest of time, I will just be introducing our 4 panelists. I will not go into detail of their great achievements. There is a leaflet that you could pick up. It's both in English and in Japanese, and please feel free to stay after to talk to them if you like.
これからこの4人のパネリストを紹介したいと思うんですけれども、あまり時間もないので、そんなに詳細は申し上げませんが、皆さん素晴らしい経歴をお持ちの方です。で、皆さんにお配りした資料がございますので、そちらに詳細が書いてあります。ご覧ください。
You can translate and then I'll tell you when to. Very quickly again, my name is Hao Nian and I'll be moderating this particular session. Originally, it was supposed to be Charlene Rajendran, but due to interest of time, there is another session that I really need her to be in, so I'll be filling in for this one.
で、あともう一つ、本当はモデレーターとしてシャーリーン・レジェンドラーがやる予定だったんですけれども、彼女次のセッションのモデレーションも務めることになっていて、そちらも本当に重要なので、ちょっと彼女には休憩してもらって、私ハウニャンが今回はモデレートすることになります。
Very quickly now, from my left, I'd like to introduce Natalie Hennedige from Cake Theatre Singapore.
左からシンガポールケークシアターのナタリー・ヘンネイジ。
Next, we have Eisa Jocson from the Philippines.
フィリピンからアイサ・ジョクソンです。
We have fans. We have many fans. Okay, the fans will have to wait. On Aisa's left is Ruhanie Perera from Sri Lanka.
スリランカからルハニ・ペレラさん。
And last but not least, Shinta Febriany from Indonesia.
そして最後にインドネシアからシンタ・フェブラニーさんです。
So without further ado, I'd like to ask, I guess it's going to start with Natalie to start the presentation.
では、ナタリーさんからまずプレゼンテーションを始めていただきます。
Take it away.
Okay, I'll go with this. Yeah, I might stand a little bit.
Please go ahead, do whatever you need to do.
All right.
And again, in the interest of time, please try to stick within.
Okay, it would be great if just nudge me, just say stop. I've got to.
Keepers are there.
Oh, cool. Okay, good.
They can shout.
Okay, so I should speak into a mic, yeah?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Recording the session.
All right. And it's on. Okay, hi everyone. I'm Natalie. Thank you all for being here. I'm from Singapore. I conceive, write, and direct for the theatre. I haven't yet worked with a dramaturg. I was invited to come to this, and it's of great interest, and it has been very invigorating for me already to be part of this. So I'm going to share, in the only way I know how, I shall hone into a work that I created, and by sharing as honestly as I can the process, maybe that will open things up for discussion. Cake is a 11-year-old contemporary performance-making company. And in the last year or so, I had gone into a trajectory that I had wanted to do for a long time, which was to engage with the classics. I spent the first 10 years of the company quite serious about doing original work. Moving into the classics, I feel, doesn't take away from that. But I first wanted to hold off the thing that I loved. So I'm going to talk about a reimagination of Ophelia and talk a little bit about that process. And maybe that will give some insight into the artistic process. Now, Shakespeare's Hamlet spends most of the play talking about madness and suicide. None of those things happened to him, and both happened to Ophelia. The first thing I wanted to do was to give Ophelia, to have for her version of the to be or not to be question, which is to live or to die, right? Now, Hamlet is given the to be or not to be question, which is linked to choice. Ophelia, different story, right? And so for me to find that for her was important. And I did that by thinking about the twin metaphor of drowning and swimming, which is linked to her because her life ends in a pool of water. One of the most striking images was an oil painting created in 1852, Sir John Everett Malay's painting of Ophelia, and she is encapsulated, beautiful, and quite dead in a pool of water, young and beautiful. Now we know that the drowned dead are bloated, and there's something that's rotting that's not really depicted in this picture. To begin my process, I wrote. And so I'm just going to share the very first piece of writing that I did to kind of solidify this concept, the idea of the swimming and drowning metaphor, which again was Ophelia's version of the to be or not to be. So I'll just read it. I'm going to get onto my, if I can just get onto that first page, and that would be great. Okay, Ophelia says, "Be willing to put your head under water. I do so. Panic sets in. Can't breathe, can't see. Lungs tightening, heart exploding, fear and more fear. The sensation of drowning. I'm submerged, and no one will hear my voice or know how badly I'm dying. I come out of the water, choking and gasping for air. A moment after relief, a moment after calm, a moment after the dreadful feeling that nothing has changed. Desperate for change, I make my mouth into an O, suck in as much air as my lungs can hold and go back under. As I do so, water shoots up my nose and burns. I worm my way up again into false freedom. In a few moments, everything begins to normalize. I'm breathing quick and easy. A moment after, I'm bobbing about in shallow water. A moment after, the dreadful feeling that nothing has changed. The change I have yearned for, languished after, others have fought for years, has not come. And something tells me I should have remained submerged a little longer. Chicken shit. The fact is, in order to swim, you must be willing to put your head under water." The first thing that I did was to cast this role. And it was very important who embodied the role. And I knew it couldn't just be anyone who could act. I wanted, well, there were a few people I thought of, and the person that was very close to what I was trying to find in this work was a Malaysian actress, Jo Kukutas, who's middle-aged and embodies certain energies that I felt was important in the work. I casted her against a young Hamlet, a young virile Hamlet, and that was important. Remember, I talked about that painting, and she's beautiful, pale, young thing. that's dead and beautiful in a pool of water. And I wanted for our Ophelia to have gone through more things. That was the imagination, that she needed to go through these other journeys. So we imagined different things for her. In the end of the play, I returned her back to Shakespeare and she dies. Okay, yeah. So there again, I talked about that twin metaphor of drowning and swimming, and that's one of the key images that I would say encapsulates that. And the other thing that I did with the piece was to set this Ophelia in the space of the theatre where Hamlet is the writer, director, the auteur, and Ophelia is the actress. Okay? And part of this is that, and Hamlet's the all-consuming head, isn't it? Isn't it? I mean, in some ways we're all Hamlet, isn't it? Those of us who, I mean, we're all little gods, right? That need to speak and be heard. And he's allowed to be because that's who he is, right? And so I put them in the context of the piece, where Hamlet is the writer and director, and here you have Ophelia in the center. They also, Shakespeare's Hamlet and Ophelia are lovers, and we do that too. They are lovers in this piece, but you are also the disconnect, the apparent physical and age disparity between the actors will do something in the way that you perceive the work. Okay, so we created a miniature, sort of like the set was inspired by the model of a set. And there you have Ophelia. So you notice she pokes above the set, just like the way a model of a set is slightly of a different scale, right? And she awaits the entrance of director Hamlet. And the first words he utters are, "I am Ophelia, and these are my instructions on swimming." And the door opens, Ophelia is up there, startled at what she hears. Of course, the director, Hamlet, he's the writer-director, and he's also the performer. He is the world of the piece. And so we have here him creating these tremendous dramatic effects. We involved the crew in this piece, and this is his scene where he's talking about how he's lamenting his father's death. And this is where he has the crew kind of create the theatrical effect for him, with water, and in that way he's able to just kind of express the magnitude of his grief, the magnitude of his madness. Again, too, here, Ophelia talks a lot about being to the side, and let me just read another portion of the piece that I wrote in relation to their relationship. Ophelia says to Hamlet, "Hamlet, you rant, mope about in black, mourning your father, your existence. Everyone frets, everyone fears for your mental state, your well-being. Your melancholy takes center stage. Why does he talk so, behave so? Is he mad or just acting so? Is he stable? Will he kill himself? You have everyone's attention." Hamlet says, "We are lovers, inextricably linked. When my life is dissected, my thoughts scrutinized, my word studies, you two are part of my picture. We are together." Ophelia says, "Sure, but it's not good for me. You remain the whole picture. I only part of something. You dazzle everyone with your misery while I remain to the side, partially in your shadow." Hamlet says, "I write you. The main character I cast into being is you, flawed but pure, fierce, tragic, beautiful." Ophelia says, "You are lying to yourself. You are not writing me, nor do I desire you to. You write for yourself only." Hamlet insists, "No." Ophelia says, "You cannot see it. That's why you suffer and are a fool. You cannot see past yourself, Hamlet." Here's another image of the theatricality of Hamlet, where he has a fan. Like I said, it's a rehearsal of a piece, and so with the theatrics, he goes out of control. I think what was very important for us too was not to diminish this magnitude of the character. You know, when I was working with the actors, there was an anxiety. Why is there so much of Hamlet? Why is there so much of Hamlet in this piece? Well, Shakespeare's Hamlet is the engine of the piece, and I didn't want to diminish that, right? But I wanted Ophelia to rise through that. I'm not going to create a piece where I diminish Hamlet and therefore Ophelia rises. I'm going to place Hamlet as he is, big, bold, and wonderful, right? And then have Ophelia work with that tension. You know, and that way you can really look at a very true kind of power dynamic and a struggle, you know. And there he goes again, right? Being very sort of blaming her. This is a wonderful thing he says where he has trouble eventually with Polonius, her father. And so he does the scene where he calls a crew member up there and he says, well, come on, put on the beard. And then questions her about her father and about her loyalty to him. And saying, a woman must submit to just one man, but you choose to submit to two. You allow him to spy on me. Yeah. And I think what was intrinsic was that they loved each other, and he had to love her, and we built that, and that he needed her, and in many ways she was the center of his life, but privately. We're not talking about something privately. Ophelia wants to be publicly strong and willful. What we did in the piece too was we reversed some roles. So the imagination of the piece took her away. Obviously, from the starting point of the piece was very close to Shakespeare's Ophelia, but she was also in our imagination, and we were able to do this because of the role playing, because we had set it in a theater, because they were theater makers, they were creators, right? Hamlet was the creator, and here was Ophelia, the actor creator, trying to wrestle away from the all-consuming auteur. So with that we were able to do these. We were able to give her these other lives. So she was a revolutionary fighter in one scene, a little scene. Of course, he breaks the scene quite quickly. Here we have Ophelia as the writer, Hamlet here being quite distraught about a bad review. And I think and I think many of the small scenes stemmed from this one scene that I wanted to do, which was Ophelia. In this scene, they're both political people, and they're there, and they both believe they're worthy of the vote. And you have Hamlet on this tall umpire chair, which is, as you can see, it's a very minimal set, and so that chair has a lot of significance. It's the director's chair. It's a chair where Ophelia gets to sit occasionally when she's resting, or when he's elsewhere. And so in this particular scene, when they are convincing the public that they deserve the vote, Ophelia sort of looks to that chair, raises a hand at it, and just before this happens, actually, it's apparent in the scene that she's saying these things. She's earning the respect of the public, and there's a lot of there are these sounds that seem like people are for Ophelia. And of course, as she walks towards that chair, he topples it. Yeah. Yeah, and that there was there was quite an well, okay, I won't talk about that previous image. There's a bunch of other things I could talk about the piece, but I'll get to the end of where I'm going with this. And for me, again, I spent a lot of time building Hamlet in the rehearsal room because I had to fall in love with Hamlet. When you create, when I create, and the title of the piece is Ophelia, I'm the defense lawyer for Ophelia. But in creating good theater, I need to fall in love with the person that's causing both Ophelia and me grief too. This figure of this man. And so I had to fall in love with him, and I worked a lot with him, sometimes to the frustration of Ophelia. I just told her, the actress playing Ophelia, I said, trust it, you're amazing. But I am going to spend time with him. Don't come in for rehearsals for 3 days. I'm going to spend time with him. She was very upset about that. I said, trust me on this. Because, and I also casted someone I genuinely loved as a human being, because I feel that was important. That makes it a lot more complex. And here you see, you know, who wouldn't want to give him a sweet? Okay. But of course, this is also the scene where she leaves. Of course, that's the imagined scene, right? She says, I'm leaving. I'm leaving. And he is weeping. And she says, and he says, I'll die. And she says, die. And then he comes back in a little while later with a Nerf gun. And a Nerf gun's not going to kill you, but it is rather humiliating to be publicly shot with these plastic bullets. And he rains these toy bullets at her. Like I said, at the end, I return her to Shakespeare. And she has a little moment there, but it's a choice she makes. I think what's happened at the end of the piece is she articulates her to be or not to be. And so choice is returned to her. Thank you.
Hello. So, hello everybody. I'm Eisa Jocson from the Philippines. My background is in the ballet first, and then visual arts, then pole dancing, and then macho dancing. And currently was a Snow White princess. So that is my background. I got propelled into the field of performance, let's say, through my practice as a pole dancer. And it was, 10 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, that this had happened. It was in the beginning of this pole dance fitness craze, which was coming from the red light district and appropriated by the fitness industry. So it was an interesting time for, let's say, the social economic function of pole dancing, where in the red light district you have women getting paid to perform for men, and in the fitness studio it's women paying to learn pole dancing for themselves. So in my biography there, I think it says that I won this competition, and this is the competition clip. It doesn't have sound though. Ah, there. So I'm interested of the movement of the body, both in micro and macro space, in which micro I mean movement language, and macro space meaning movement of the body into a certain geography, let's say migration. And it's grounded on social, cultural, economic, political conditions and historical formation. And I'm specifically interested in the Filipino body in the service industry. So my first work that comes out of this practice is called Stainless Borders, the Deconstruction of Architectures of Control. It's essentially public interventions using guerrilla street pole dancing combined with graffiti tagging using vertical urban fixtures. So I'm actually going to structure my talk by going through my trajectory of works from 2010 until now, and speaking about briefly about the motivation, process, and production. So this work was done in 2010, was invited in a contemporary art festival situated in the town of Sint-Niklaas in Belgium. So the impetus of this piece was first to further dislocate the practice of pole dancing from the red light district into the fitness industry, which are still both exist in private space, and catapulted into public space. And then, in a way, it explores vertical potentials in public space as well as push the visibility of the gendered body. Okay, let's move on. Death of the Pole Dancer. So Death of the Pole Dancer was done in 2011, and basically it interrogates audience perception during the act of pole dancing. It was commissioned by In Transit Festival in Berlin, curated by none other than Mr. Tang Fu-Kuen. And the theme back then was spectatorship. So Fu-Kuen asked me to make a work around this theme, and this resulted in this piece called Death of a Pole Dancer. So essentially the impetus for this piece is to dislocate or disrupt the usual position of the spectator in a pole dancing act. And in terms of process, a lot went into exploring preparation or practical rituals in pole dancing, such as setting the pole up, wiping the pole, testing the strength of the pole to, testing the capacity of the pole, as well as physically exploring the relation between pole and the pole dancer. So, for example, the strength of the pole against the body, the strength of the body against the pole, as well as the materiality of steel and flesh. So this goes into the sound of flesh on steel, the different dynamics that this create. So in this excerpt, you don't see the beginning, which was me coming in with a portable pole in a bag. I guess some of you have seen it live here in TPAM 2 years ago. So this work was commissioned and premiered in Transit Festival, and was created in residency in Brussels, Nadine, during that time.
don't know what to do with myself.
And in 2013, I created the work Macho Dancer. And essentially, it's an act of rebellion from my practice as a pole dancer. I was resisting to be labeled as a pole dance artist, or an artist that is solely working on pole. And for me, it was on a personal level to further challenge my own body politics, basically the history of my formation as an individual. So it was a confrontation between my gender formation, social class, education, educational capital, or body labor as well. And basically, Macho Dancer is a solo piece of a woman performing a macho dance. A macho dance is exclusively performed by young men in macho clubs for male and female clients. So this is an excerpt of the piece. Balance or groundedness. I was basically a walking kind of tripod with the pole as my third leg. So it took me, it was a quite challenging time to kind of reformat my body to actually stand on both feet in the grounded way. So it was a whole system of body reformatting. Yeah, and then this was, in terms of production, the research or fieldwork was 1 year in Manila, and the creation and work in progress was supported by Workspace Brussels in Brussels, technical creation in Antwerp, and the premiere in Brussels. So the next work is Host, which I'm performing tomorrow. So basically, Host is a one-woman entertainment service machine. This work is motivated by hybrid identities of Filipino entertainers in Japan. So the body becomes a host to a database of female body representations. I'm not going to show you more because you're supposed to see it. Yeah, so the main impetus or motivation for me was the first time I went to Japan and asked a question, what was the relation between Philippines and Japan? And I realized that it was this Filipino entertainers that kind of mediated a certain relation. And they're actually called Japayukis, which is entertainers or people working in Japan, basically. And this has a very negative stigma, both in Japanese society and Philippine society. And which is quite a bit not so interesting in the sense that they're actually, this Filipino entertainers are actually repositories of hybrid identities that perform and negotiate their Filipino identity in relation to or in negotiation or in appropriation of ideal femininity in Japan. So the challenge here for me was to place my body in a foreign context with foreign, movement languages. And basically, as opposed to macho dance and pole dancer, which are singular vocabularies, here in Host, there's an exploration of multiplicity of female representations relating to the subject. So there was this learning of traditional Japanese dance, new Japanese dance, American pop, and of course K-pop, which is kind of the new mode of Asian or global femininity. So it's kind of a mapping and trajectory of certain female representations. And in terms of production, the research residency was in Saison Foundation, and then moved into a work-in-progress showing and creation in Brussels with the support of Workspace Brussels, and then a showing in TPAM, a work-in-progress showing in TPAM, creation and work-in-progress in Manila, and technical creation and premiere in Tan's house in Dusseldorf. I say all these things in terms of production and the places they were passing through, as I think that it is an important part of the process, an important part of how the work manifests itself. So it's part of the dramaturgy. The location in which the work is created is part of what goes into the dramaturgy of the work. And so moving on. What is this? Okay, so 2017, after 3 solo works that kind of form a trilogy, I've told myself, okay, I don't want to perform on stage alone anymore. So I've tasked myself to challenge to work with another person or in groups, and the next series of project is called Happyland, which refers to Disneyland, and in the local context, an infamous slum in Manila called Happyland as well. This is the Uber title of the project, which is about Filipino labor, performance of happiness, and production of fantasy within the global entertainment empire of Disneyland. So it's a 3-part series. The first one, called Princess, just premiered in Musenturm, Frankfurt last weekend, February 11 and 12. And it's basically 2 Filipino performers hijacking the white-skinned princess, or the archetypal model that dominates narratives of children while excluding their context, bodies, and histories. So these 2 Filipino performers basically program her movement and speech into their own bodies, hijacking the narratives of this princess, and using this narrative to speak their own context. So I give you the trailer.
I'm wishing.
So that was a trailer. Actually, this clip is from the very first work in progress showing in Hong Kong. So the production, I'm just going to list it down. The first research residency was 2 years ago in a Parasite Gallery in Hong Kong. And then as an extension of the research, I did the kind of Snow White exploration inside the Circus Project in Germany. So that was more of a kind of exploring the potential of Snow White, the figure of Snow White in relation to an audience. And then it went into another creation period in Musenturm and another creation period in Manila, and creation work in progress showing in Piano Fabrique in Brussels, and then back into Musenturm again for the technical creation and premiere. So it's a long process of research and trying out and again, and this feeds into the manifestation of the work. Yeah, so that's the, I guess, maybe to open up the discussion, or maybe not, but what is interesting in this project is that I actually work with almost 3 dramaturgs, kind of dramaturgs. I mean, they were all not called dramaturgs in the work, but they were giving very valuable feedback and kind of a soundboard, and they were all operating in different levels of feedback giving, and not at all conflicting, but actually addressing kind of several spectrums on different layers of the work. So Fuquen over there is a producer dramaturg, and he's aside from the dramaturgy of the piece, is also the dramaturgy of production, if there is such a thing as that. So that the support system of the work actually is coming from a spectrum of contexts that is vital to the work's manifestation. And time is up. So wait, I think the kind of the recurring critic or comment that we were having during the work in progress, during the creation period, was that we were too much respecting the material. So people, outside eyes or people coming in, were having this desire that we break this form because it's Disney. But you have to see the work to see why it's such a recurring comment. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm Ruhanie, and I live and work in Sri Lanka. I work primarily as a performer, and I work with a theatre company by the name of Floating Space. Interestingly, in the theatre company, one of the things is that it's a performer-driven company, but we also have researchers and activists who form the core of the company. It's in a way, Floating Space has done work that has been reflective of a particular landscape, so a very particular socio-cultural landscape in Sri Lanka, which is the war and the complexity of that war story for every one of us as individuals. We didn't start out as a company that was a political theatre company, but more to reflect. And hi, Ken-sen just stood up, so I had to say hi. The company kind of evolved in its articulation and its responses to, at different times, censorship, the abduction of journalists, displacement as an issue. And we are still 5 sort of people who are grappling actually with our war context more than our post-war context. So some of the work that I will talk about will reflect that. One of the other things also, and we are much more aware of it when we talk about dramaturgy now, especially since I was here last year, is that we've never really defined the role within the company, but because we are performers, at different times we kind of influence each other's processes. And as we become more and more aware of that influencing that we do, we've sort of created a space of conversation and negotiation, really, that I think has really become for us the space of dramaturgy, that we are always open to conversing with each other, and we're always open to a particular kind of negotiation that takes place. That's not always very friendly, but it opens the space for the performance to grow, but also for the performers to grow. So having said that, I actually wanted to focus on vulnerability, because in this space of negotiation and conversation, I have found myself quite vulnerable as a performer in my own body. And so there's nothing quite frustrating sort of being a performer, sitting in a rehearsal room and knowing that your body is just not going to work. And that's kind of the process that begins the questions of the why of your performance and the how of your performance, especially in terms of its making, but also, I think, in terms of its possible potential failure that we also grapple with in the rehearsal room. And sometimes I have felt that I stand outside of my body. So my body stands in its own materiality, and it becomes estranged from my intention for it. And then in that way, your body kind of tends to refuse you, and knowing that it exists only to be read, it also refuses to speak. So in that sense, it has been interesting for me to start thinking about, especially in a panel that is about women, that is about sort of feminist agendas and the provocations we have, or invitations also, the way we invite people to look at our bodies. My struggle with my own body is kind of the preoccupation that I've had, and that sort of is going to be the thread that links the performance examples that I will talk you through. So I'd like to start talking about a particular performance by the name of My Other History that we performed in 2011. The company was invited to create a performance around the idea of reconciliation, you know, the way in which people do. They throw a word at you and they ask you to create a performance. So we were given reconciliation. Because it was 2011, the war was over in 2009, it was about time that artists could start making performances on the theme of reconciliation. And we weren't the only company. There were 2 companies that were granted this Young Theatre Makers Award. And we really had to sit there and try and figure out what we wanted to do with it. Interestingly, I entered into the process as the performer, and my sort of founder in the company entered into it as the writer and the director of the work as well. Others fill the other roles like research and production and, you know, other actors as well. But the structure of Maya, the history, was the story of a boy who had lived in the north of the country in Jaffna, had then moved to Sri Lanka, moved to Colombo, and then left the country. And he posted his story on Facebook. And he talked about this complexity now with the country opening up, of what home meant and what the possibility of going back home means for different people at different times. And he also talked about a mango tree and eating the mangoes that grew in the house in Jaffna. And in this particular arid landscape of Jaffna, there's a particular mango that comes from there. So it exists as a kind of signifier. So naturally, the writer of the piece was, you know, honed in on this and said, this is where we're going to start. This is the structure. And interestingly for him, it was a visceral experience because he had been to school for a while with this boy. And the fact that they had shared 4 years that one had assumed were very kind of parallel years, because of the posting of this story, opened up another question of an entire life that was completely differently constituted, but in this kind of, you know, sit in the English class together kind of context that had also become diluted. And with that, an identity had become diluted, a story had been diluted, a history of a people had been diluted. Perhaps I should contextualize also that in Sri Lanka, the sort of the imagined homeland, if you like, exists in the north of the country. And when we talk about movement from the north of the country, people coming into Colombo, more often than not, you came looking for a kind of sanctuary if you were not leaving the country also. And so I don't know if we started out to create a story about displacement, but this became the story that we wanted to speak about. But as I go back to this performance, I always found that there were 3 kind of silences that existed in the performance. One was the silence of the context, in terms of, so in order to make this story speak, the predominant choice somehow that we made was to perform it in a very naturalistic fashion. And this was because we wanted audiences to believe the story. We didn't want any kind of estrangement from a story that was coming, especially at this particular time, in our lives as just people, but also in our lives as a theatre company. We didn't want the abstraction of form to kind of put anybody off. And so I couldn't work. I was suddenly, you know, sitting there, bawling my eyes out, finding ways for tears to communicate, to create certain layers of affect that I struggled with. I knew the choice and I knew the necessity for that choice, but in myself I struggled about what was I doing with a particular story as I created a particular kind of affective trajectory for it. The other silence was the silence of the character, because actually there was no woman in the original story that was posted online. But there was a female actress in the company, and we had to use her. So as the writer-director was writing the story, there was this big absence of, of a woman. And we struggled with who she was going to be and how she was going to articulate herself as a character. And then somewhere I got frustrated and I said, okay, I'm going to go out and start doing interviews. And I started working with women who were living in Colombo, who had experienced displacement in terms of having left Jaffna and moved to Colombo and now lived in Colombo. I started with one woman, and then I went to another, and then I went to another, and then I went to another, and eventually I had something like 7 or 8 stories that informed my character, but also in turn actually informed the script. the script picked 4 particular stories of one woman that I interviewed. One, a film role. A woman who said that the last photographs of her father was in a particular film role. And when they had to leave, they left so fast, they left the film roll behind. And she went back, not because she knew it was going to be the last photographs of her father on it, but because it was her daughter's 6th birthday photographs on that film roll. And she went back because she wanted it. And she picked it up and she came back. And eventually her father didn't make it through the process of moving to Colombo. And so it ended up that this particular film roll had the last photographs of her father on it. This story made its way into the performance. She talked about also constantly praying that she would get good water because she needed to make milk for her baby. And she thought, whatever happens to the rest of us, as long as we had good boiled water to make milk regularly. And so that kind of constant living in trying to make sure that you had good water became the undertone also of the performance. The third part of the story was her walking. The story of displacement also means that there are particular junctures at which you stop. And between those junctures that you stop, there are ways in which you walk. And we all know where the shelters are, where the spaces of refuge are between the north and the south of the country. So it became important to then start actually kind of bearing witness also to these places. And so the names of the refugee camps kind of started entering into the text. And then finally, she talked about the last day when they left, about the air raids in Jaffna. And she talks a lot about actually what it destroyed and how it made them leave. And this becomes the third part of the silence of the story. Because when we finally sent in our script for a performance license, and I think maybe all of us know the structure, when in Sri Lanka, when you send in a script for a performance license, the censor board is worked into this performance license organization. So the script is also censored. And at different points, the censoring has always been arbitrary. There has never been a particular regulation or anything sort of published on what grounds scripts will be censored. So the third layer of silence we grappled with was when we were told, sorry, you can perform this script, but you have to take all the references to the shelling, the air raids out. Which was particularly interesting because this was born of the lived experience of people. But at this moment in the country, we couldn't yet talk about what was this lived experience. So there was now this sort of third layer of silence that we had to deal with in performance, where the director, the producer, and the performer had to sign against the script to say, okay, these lines we will not sort of speak in performance. So what happened then actually was how to deal with the fact that our play had been censored. Did we want to dig our heels in and say, no, we won't perform unless, you give us the rights to perform the whole thing? It was not an easy negotiation, but it made more sense to actually perform with the censored sections rather than not perform the piece at all and wait for an eventuality. And then the question became, how do we artistically indicate that the performance had been censored? So we didn't rewrite anything. We actually left the gaps so that the script was tilted, and at some points you knew there was text that was clearly missing because the certain jumps that went from one section to another meant that something had been taken out. And we did inform the audience before we performed that they were watching a performance that had been censored, so that there was a way in which you knew as you engaged with the performance that, there was always a silence that was speaking through. So, oh my goodness, so soon. So I was dealing with these sort of three kinds of silence when I started to try and articulate it differently through a piece that took about 2 years to develop, which first was titled as Between Truth and Its Telling, and then eventually ended up as Absence, and Kensen saw a part of it when I was working on it. Because I became more and more concerned about the trajectory of the female story, especially when it is displaced, and the kind of the face of it, what the face of it looks like. Okay. So I just started creating an archive of women's faces, because for me, I was dealing with what I had kind of created, and this was my archive of faces that I had kind of manipulated in some ways my own face to look like. And I started sort of looking for any news report that talked over and over again about mothers looking for children, missing children, missing in the process of movement, missing in the process of staying. And these faces became something of an obsession for me. And that led me to create this piece where I started working with manipulating my own face for what initially was something like 8 minutes, and now I can go on for about 20 minutes to half an hour as well, to kind of really work with what I am doing with manipulating my face, what kinds of faces it creates, what kind of affective kind of layers it invokes in an audience, and whether it invokes the same kind of affect when you make the structure evident to an audience. And as I was doing this work, so one of the things is the consciousness that led to this kind of work, and to look at this idea of the female body also that's constantly in process. And then I started actually opening my sort of practice to also start working with and looking at other work by artists. And this one particular image, which I really like, became an interesting kind of sisterhood in some ways in terms of the work. And this is a visual artist's work. Her name is Ruhanie Perera, and she also works with the idea of the female body and the way in which the gaze kind of co-opts the female body. It's called I Let My Hair Loose, and Protest Series is the subtitle. And her protest is actually, so it's all this, I'm sure we all have it in our homes, these black and white images of our grandmothers sort of sitting to be photographed. And the fact that she kind of puts her hair over her face every time she arranges meticulously these photographs to look exactly like it did sort of 30 years ago. The hair over the face kind of displaces the gaze once more. So in my own practice, I think it has become more and more interesting for me to sort of go back to my original starting point of dealing with the different kind of silences I dealt with, and then to start actually looking at my own body, where it gets stuck, what problems I have with my own manipulations as a performer, and then to start kind of opening up that trajectory to look at a larger collective of women kind of struggling with their own bodies, and looking at ways in which you refuse a gaze, or you create kind of sites of resistance, at least in through different strategies, as we place our body in a particular space. Okay. I'll finish. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Shinta. I'm from Makassar, South Sulawesi. It's another island in Indonesia. I thought I will speak in the last day on this meeting, but there's a wrong schedule, so it's okay for me. So I'm going to share my works on theater as a director, But I think I need Haley to help me here. Okay. As I mentioned, I live in Makassar, South Sulawesi. Is a patriarchy society masih sangat kuat di sana.
The patriarchy is still strong, remains strong in Makassar.
Itulah kenapa kemudian teater menjadi begitu sulit untuk perempuan di sana.
That's why buat teater.
Yeah.
Making theater was still very hard for women.
At the beginning.
In the beginning. Yeah.
Okay. Then keterlibatan perempuan dalam teater on the stage itu masih diasumsikan sebagai upayanya untuk memperlihatkan seksualitasnya.
So the woman involvement to perform on stage at that time was still considered as showing her own sexuality.
So the audience still hope they can see aktris yang cantik, perempuan dengan buah dada yang besar, also kind of that.
So the audience still expected to see a beautiful woman with big breasts and yeah.
So let me share my work in first. It's called Namaku Adam tanpa huruf kapital.
So this is my work titled My Name is Adam without capital A.
Naskah ini berbicara tentang dekonstruksi mitos laki-laki sebagai kepala keluarga.
So it tells about the deconstruction of male as a head of family. This is back in 2003, yeah?
Yeah,
so it's an
2003. And sebagian besar masyarakat masih menganggap mitos itu memang gambaran aktual dari situasi laki-laki.
So part of the society still believe that it's this myth was part of this what man should be.
Okay, so apa yang ingin saya sampaikan adalah bahwa mitos itu sudah tidak aktual lagi untuk menjadi pegangan masyarakat.
What I would like to express here is that the myth was not really actual for people to hold on to.
Karena berdasarkan riset kami, terutama kepada laki-laki seniman yang bekerja di teater, yang miskin dan menikah, mereka tidak bisa berada pada posisi itu.
Because based on our research, that targeting male artists who married and they were poor, they could not hold this position anymore.
So, I start to write the script. Saya memulai menulis naskahnya. Saya pikir itu adalah kerja dramaturgi yang pertama yang saya lakukan. Saya membayangkan adegannya.
So I started to write the script, and I thought it was the first sort of dramaturgical process that I did because I start imagining the scenes.
Membuat struktur pertunjukannya, memikirkan artistik dan tematiknya secara lebih detail.
So I start making a structure of the performance, and then start thinking about all the elements in details.
Pertunjukannya, I'll show you the video. Jelas. Pertunjukannya dimulai dengan aktor yang memberikan surat kepada setiap penonton, juga satu kembang api.
So it started by all the actors giving the audience one letter and one firecracker, fireworks, like, yeah. Not the fire, it's like, the sparkle. Yeah.
Sparkle. So the letter came from Adam, the aktor laki-laki.
So the letter came from, it's written by Adam, the male actor.
Suratnya berisi tentang kesedihan mereka menjadi hidup dalam mitos tentang keharusan menjadi kepala rumah tangga.
So the content of the letter is they express how sad they are to become the head of a family.
So ada adegan di mana seorang aktor perempuan membuat penis dari mentega dan tepung as a
So there's a scene where the
make a penis.
where the female actor make a penis made of butter and flour.
Dan meletakkan kembang api di atasnya pada adegan penutup.
And put the sparkle on the top of the penis at the end of the piece.
Ya, kami pikir semua orang harus berbahagia, lelaki dan perempuan harus berbahagia dengan gender dan seksualitas yang mereka miliki.
Because we think that I think male or female they have to be happy, content with the gender they inherent in them.
Ada juga adegan di mana para aktor lelaki mengepel lantai.
So there is another scene when the male actors mopping the floor.
Saya ingat masa kecil saya ketika belajar mengaji.
Because I reminisce of my childhood when I start learning to recite Quran.
Sebelum dan sesudah mengaji biasanya kami disuruh oleh guru pengaji untuk mengangkat air dan mengepel.
Because normally before and after we learn how to recite the Quran, our male teacher, gurunya laki-laki,
perempuan.
The female teacher would ask us to mop the floor.
Ya, jadi laki-laki dan perempuan melakukan tugas itu.
So both female and male students did the same assignment task.
So I keep the memory sebagai pelajaran pertama tentang bagaimana seharusnya gender berlangsung.
So I keep that memory, that piece of memory, as something that how gender should be, how both gender should share the same tasks.
Di hari pertama pertunjukan itu menuai protes yang keras, terutama dari Himpunan Mahasiswa Islam di Makassar.
When it was firstly staged, it got a lot of very strong reaction, especially from the organization of Islamic students. It's very powerful organization nationwide.
Ya, mereka kurang lebih berkata bahwa pertunjukan semacam ini semestinya tidak ada di sini, tidak di.
They said that such stage as such performance should not be here.
Itu sesuatu yang tidak pantas.
It's not
porno.
It's pornographic and it's indecent.
Karya lainnya yang juga kemudian berbicara tentang relasi perempuan dan lelaki.
So the other work that talks about the relation between male and female.
Itu judulnya Kisah Tubuh.
Is titled Story of a Body.
So
Story of Body.
Ya, aktornya membocorkan bagian tubuh mereka yang ingin mereka sembunyikan, tidak ingin dilihat oleh orang banyak. Tells the audience.
Tells atau show?
And show.
Because first she used the word the actor leak. It's part of the body. Laki atau perempuan?
Semuanya.
Okay. The actors leak the female, both female and male actors leak the body, meaning that show the parts of their body that they previously wanted to hide.
Bekas luka di perut karena operasi.
For example, like the scars on the belly because post-operative.
Bekas luka di lengan.
And scars on the arm.
Tanda di pantat.
Birth sign on the buttock.
Hal semacam itu juga belum bisa diterima dengan baik oleh audiens.
And such things was not really could still not well received, could not perceived well by the audience.
Ya, mereka masih merasa itu tidak pantas untuk diperlihatkan kepada umum. pada audiens.
Because they still felt that it's not appropriate to show such things, to the audience, to other people.
Tapi menurut kami penting sekali membuat teater yang mampu membuat audiens merefleksikan apa yang sudah mereka pahami.
But for us, it was important to create a theater that makes audience understand
Apa yang sudah mereka pahami.
Understand what they had experienced, alami, pahami.
Tubuh laki-laki dan tubuh perempuan di teater memiliki perbedaan atau disebut-sebut memiliki perbedaan yang kuat sekali. Tubuh laki-laki.
So it was always said that the male body and the female body in theater has a distinct difference.
Ya, tapi tubuh laki-laki dan tubuh perempuan sebenarnya menurut saya memiliki kesempatan kans yang sama untuk berbicara tentang satu gagasan.
But for me, I think both male and female body has the same similar opportunities to speak about the same thing.
Misalnya dalam kasus Namaku Adam tanpa huruf kapital.
For example, in the first piece, My Name is Adam without capital A.
Ada adegan di mana aktor lelaki berlari, push up, sit up.
There's a scene when a male actor running and doing push up and sit up
sambil
exercises.
Mengucapkan teks dialog, aku harus melatih tubuhku agar aku dicintai.
While saying, I have to train my body so I can be loved.
Di saat yang sama perempuan juga, aku harus mempercantik diriku in the reality, aku harus mempercantik diriku agar aku disukai.
Sama ini.
Enggak, ini maksudku di kenyataannya.
In the reality, the female also sometimes thinks that we have to beautify ourselves so we can be loved.
Ya, jadi ada satu persepsi yang melemahkan tubuh perempuan itu sendiri di atas panggung.
So there is a perception that weaken the female body on stage.
Itulah kenapa saya dan kawan-kawan di Kala Teater tertarik untuk mengeksplorasi tubuh laki-laki sebenarnya.
That's why I and my colleagues in Kala Theater are actually very interested to explore the male body.
Itu hal yang sangat jarang dilakukan.
It's very seldom to do.
Tubuh laki-laki dalam teater diasumsikan sebagai tubuh yang perkasa.
Because male body on stage, it's perceived as something, perform prowess.
Dan tubuh perempuan sebaliknya.
And while the female body is on the opposite.
So I'll show you the trailer of Namaku Adam. My name is Adam without capital letter. You don't have to be a hero, she said. I'm tired. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for all the four panelists here. Due to my inability to count and to add simple numbers, we actually do not have time for questions and answer, I'm afraid. I'm so sorry about that. But I could take one or two questions very quickly if we have some burning questions out there.
なかなかうまくタイムマネジメントができなかったので、実は Q&A の時間がなくなってしまったんですけれども、どうしても今聞きたいっていう質問があれば1個か2つなら受け付けます。
Right, great. We're all still processing, which is fair enough. I just want to quickly wrap by perhaps giving a bit of context, because we do have an open audience. In the first session today, we did have a lively discussion about dramaturgy and the figure of the dramaturg. And one thing that emerged time and again was that perhaps we are not even ready to talk about the figure of the dramaturg yet. Perhaps we're still talking about what I term or what we've been sharing of the dramaturgical sensibility or dramaturgical thinking that's involved in a work, which is why specifically I invited these artists who I think engage with dramaturgical thought very actively in their work, even though the figure of the dramaturg is missing. And I think that is going to be evident for the other few sessions also, where the figure, the person, may not actually exist, but there, I think the makings of that sensibility is carried through in the performance and in the process of making the performance. I'm sorry, I spoke too fast.
That's okay. 実はこのセッションの前に、一つクローズのセッションがあって、そこでそのドラマトゥルギーについて、みんなで、ディスカッションを行ったんですけれども、そしてそのドラマトゥルグというのは一体どういう役割、どういう人物なんだろうかという話をしたんですが、そこで分かってきたことというのは、そのドラマトゥルグは誰なのかという話はまだする 時点には至っていないのではないかという意見がありまして、というのもみんなまだだからそのドラマトゥルが誰なのかというところまでは至れないけれども、みんなその作品を作るにあたってドラマトゥルギー的な感覚であったり考え方というのはもう明らかに用いていて、そして今ここにいる人たちもみんなやはりそのドラマトゥルギー的な、考え方をしていたということはこの皆さんの、発表ですごく明らかだったと思うんですね。なので今後もこれからまたいろいろなセッションがありますけれども、そのドラマトゥルグが誰かということはまだもしかしたらそれは見えてこない、あるいはまだそこは欠けているかもしれないけれども、ドラマトゥルギー的なセンシビリティ、その感覚というのはこれからもっと明らかになってくるのではないかと思います。
Carrying on to the next session, we will be taking a break very soon, but carrying on to the next one at 4 p.m., I think we'll be expanding again on the idea of the dramaturgical sensibility that will then expand into Dramaturging Festival, where we will have Ong Keng Sen in conversation. But for now, please put your hands together for 4 artists. Thank you so much. Arigatou gozaimasu.
Okay. 次のセッションは4時からなんですけれども、今ここで取り上げたそのドラマトゥルギー的なセンシビリティ、その感覚というのを、次はフェスティバルをどうやってそこにそのドラマトゥルギー的なセンシビリティを持ち込むのかという話を音源線にしていただきます。